하늘에 계시는 거룩하신 아버지 하나님, 이 복되고 거룩한 안식일 하나님을 사랑하는 백성들 이 자리에 서게 하시니 감사합니다. 하나님, 이 시간 우리의 주님의 문제 앞에 지금 서 있사오니 우리의 마음을 괴롭히고 하나님으로부터 멀리 만드는 우리의 마음속에 숨겨진 모든 죄를 아버지의 성령의 불을 끄고 소멸시켜 주시고 우리의 시간 말씀을 통하여 하나님의 살아계심과 하나님의 생명을 저희 마음속에 심는 그런 시간이 되고 아버지 도와해 주시옵소서. 하나님, 성령께서 이 시간 온전히 주관하셔서 우리가 드리는 예배를 통하여 하나님 부부의 영광 받으시고 우리 마음속에 하늘의 새 생명이 싹트는 그런 놀라운 시간 되게 도와주시기를 예수님의 이름으로 기도드립니다.
안식일을 준비하시는 공주로 계시는 그러나 생명의 하나님께서 주신 주님을 선한 삶으로 살아가게 하시고 실패의 시대를 하시고 나가지는 주신 하나님의 손을 다 매일 돕는 주시고 가는 말씀을 기대고 우선시켜 주시고 써주신 선생님 나누는 아버지의 완전하신 사랑과 예수 그리스도의 성품, 선한 하나님의 교통하신 것 오시니 세상 끝날까지 저와 성도들 가운데 영원히 하시니 간절히 이 자리에 함께 가지 못한 성도들 같은 하늘의 축복이 임하여 주시옵소서. 이 시간 아버지 구하며 울부짖으며 기도하시고 이곳 아버지 뜻대로 기적을 주신 주님 이 시간 주님의 말씀을 선포하는 주님의 종이 있어 아버지 성령께서 주관하시고 영향하시옵소서. 기대하신 주 예수 그리스도님 간절히
여러분 안녕하십니까? 안식일이 되니까 빨리 교회에 오고 싶은 생각이 들었습니까? 나는 어렸을 때 이런 노래를 불렀어요. 우리 어머님이 멀리 가서 기다리시듯이 내가 이 안식일을 기다립니다. 우리가 이 교회에 문을 나가면서부터 또 새로운 안식일을 손꼽아 기다리셔야 됩니다. 저는 그렇게 하고 있습니다. 교회 문을 저는 나가면서 또 안식일, 다음 안식일이 빨리 와야지. 그런 마음이 우리의 마음에 늘 있기를 바라고, 이거 80평생은 안 되는 거지만 제가 한번 이야기를 한번 해볼게요. 안식학교 시간에 정각에 출석하자는 말을 안식학교 교장이 늘 강조합니다. 그런데 그건 안 돼요. 여러분, 안 된다고 안 되는 겁니까? 그게 안 되는 겁니까? 그게 하나님께서 요구하시는 것이 아니십니까? 할 수 없는 것을 요구하십니까? 안식학교가 시작되기 전에 10분, 15분 전에 도착을 해서 기도를 드리면서 안식학교 시작이 되면 얼마나 좋겠어요. 혹시 저는 내 평생에 시간을 했는지 5손가락 합니다. 자신 있게 말씀드렸습니다. 그런데 그때에 교회 안에서 참는 그 소리가 들으면 얼마나 아주 편하고 좋은지 말할 수 없습니다. 나를 위해서, 남을 위해서, 주님을 위해서 그렇게 앞으로 교회 한번 해보세요. 계속 15분 늦은 사람은 평생 15분 늦고 30분 늦은 사람은 30분 늦고 있대요. 이거 세상에서 또 교회 숫자 하시니 하나님의 뜻이 아닙니다. 하나님의 주님들 아버지 하나님이시여, 이 귀하고 복된 안식일에 주의 성도에 와서 하나님 앞에 헌금을 할 수 있는 특권을 주셔서 정말 감사합니다. 이 헌금이 하나님의 영광을 위해서 크게 사용되게 알려주옵소서. 특별히 하나님 앞에 감사드리면서 하나님의 영광을 위해서 하나님의 신한지를 깨닫고 이렇게 많은 십자가를 헌금한 그들에게 하나님께서 복을 나누옵소서. 이 십자가를 다른 사람들에게도 나눌 수 있는 은혜도 하나님 주시옵기를 예수님의 이름으로 간절히 기도드리옵나이다. 네, 그것이
안식일 하나님께 등대드리기 위해서 이 자리에 함께 하신
We welcome in the name of the Lord all those who came to Nashville Church to worship God on the second Sabbath in June, and all who participate in this worship online.
오늘 우리 어르신들께서 정말 긍정적인 그런 찬양으로 하나님께 영광을 돌려주셔서 감사합니다.
I'm thankful for the seniors' song.
끝까지 충성하면서 주실 때까지 이 믿음만을 함께 해주시고 오늘 한국사람 여러 가정이 이 교회에 여행을 가서
There's a lot of families that are on vacation right now, so I believe they're participating online.
저는 오늘 능력이 없었던
Today I want to share God's word with the title, Why They Didn't Have Power.
하나님의 말씀 마태복음 17장
Let's all look at Matthew chapter 17, verses 17 to 20.
예수께서 대답하여
O
가로되
unbelieving and perverse generation, Jesus replied, How long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy here to me. Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of the boy.
Yeah,
He
sorry
was
about
healed
that.
from him. Then the disciples came to Jesus
방송
and asked, Why couldn't we drive it
the
out?
live like
He
여기
replied, Because you have so little faith. I tell you the truth, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, Move from here to there, and it will move. And the three disciples who accompanied him saw Jesus speaking with Moses and Elijah. When Jesus came down from the mountain at dawn the next morning, the 9 disciples left at the bottom of the mountain were surrounded by a large crowd and were in trouble. It was a situation in which the disciples could not solve the problem of a father who brought to heal his demon-possessed son. This event is recorded in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but the contents are slightly different. Matthew wrote that the son had epilepsy, and Mark wrote that he was possessed by a dumb spirit from an early age. And Luke writes that he was the only son of his father. We can picture this scene in our minds. A father who came to Jesus with a desperate heart to solve the problem of his one and only son, and the crowds that are gathered to see him. However, the disciples are bewildered because they were not able to solve the problem. Among the crowds, there were scribes who searched through the eyes of Jesus to scrutinize the work of Jesus. And they mocked the gospel work by looking at the incompetent disciples. One lesson to be learned from this fact is that the incompetence of the disciples or the church caused by lack of faith becomes a ridicule of the world. At this time, Jesus came to them.
하나님의 사역이 조롱받고 있는 그 상황 속에 처해 있을 때 예수님께서 변화산에서 제자들과 함께
There were traces of contact with the glory of heaven left on Jesus and his 3 disciples, and the light made people fearful.
그 빛에 그 예수님의 모습 속에 서려 있는 그 하늘의 영광의 빛에 인하여 사람들은 일종의 두려움감을 느꼈습니다. 그때 예수께서 그들에게 묻습니다. 너희가
Jesus asked them at the moment, "What are you arguing with them?"
이때 그
At
아이의
this time,
아버지가
the child's father
뛰어서
fell at Jesus' feet and told what had happened. In Mark chapter 9, verses 17 and 18, it says, "I have brought to you my son who was possessed by a dumb spirit. I asked your disciples to drive them out, but they could not do it."
내가 선생님의 제자들에게 쫓아가였으나 그들이 눈이 그럼 예수님께서 12명의 제자들에게
When Jesus sent out the 12 disciples to preach the gospel to all of Galilee, the disciples were given authority to suppress unclean spirits and drive them out. When they had faith and commanded in the name of Christ, the demons obeyed their words. And left the ill. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 1, it says, Jesus called the 12 and gave them power to cast out unclean spirits and to heal all diseases and infirmities. In Luke chapter 10, verse 17, it says, "And the 70 returned with joy, saying, Lord, in your name even the demons submit to us." But now they commanded demons in the same name of Christ, but they had no power.
12 제자뿐 아니라 70인의 그 사도들에게도 그들에게 70인의 제자들에게도 하나님의 그 동일한 능력이 그들에게 임했던 것입니다. 하지만 지금 그들이 동일한 그리스도의 이름으로 그 아이를 괴롭히는 귀신을 명령했지만 귀신은 나가지 않았습니다. 그들에게 아무런 능력이 없었습니다.
They had no power. Rather, the devil only ridiculed his disciples by further showing off his power. So, why were the disciples no longer capable? What happened to them at this moment? Was the haunted child's case more demanding and difficult than others? Or was the power to cast out demons temporarily granted to them and then withdrawn? Well, there were 2 reasons. There were 2 explanations for this. These are the words on page 430 of The Desire of Ages. Their unbelief that shut them out from deeper sympathy with Christ, and the carelessness with which they regarded the sacred work committed to them had caused their failure in the conflict with the powers of darkness. So the 2 answers are distrust and carelessness. As I think about this situation, it seems that Satan uses these two things to lead us to failure in our struggle with the powers of darkness. He makes our lives very busy to keep us from having a deep relationship with Jesus. All day, he also causes us to place our priorities on the wrong things, to neglect the sacred work entrusted to us. He changes our priorities, for example, wealth and worldly honor, pleasures and lusts of the flesh. Those are all things that we are prioritizing now. As a result, many of God's people become powerless in their struggle against the powers of darkness, and God's name is ridiculed, just like these disciples. Do you guys remember Samson? As you know, he was a Nazarite, set apart from God by birth. So all his life, he was not to drink wine and strong alcohol, and not to put a razor to his head. But there was one thing that Samson was forgetting. He forgot the fact that his strength was not in his uncut hair, but it was in his connection with God. Before his hair was cut off by Delilah's persistent enticement, he broke the conditions of the holy God's call little by little. God was patient for a long time, for nearly 20 years, but when Samson yielded himself to the power of sin enough to divulge the secret of the source of his power, God finally left Samson. So when Samson's relationship with God, or the source of his strength, was cut off, the strength and fame he had was only ridiculed. You can find a similar story in 1 Samuel chapter 4. In the war between Israel and the Philistines, Israel was defeated and 4,000 soldiers were killed. At this time, the elders of Israel pondered the reasons for their defeat in the war, and they came to the conclusion that they were defeated because they did not take the ark to the battlefield. So, they agreed to bring the Ark of the Covenant of God stored in the Shiloh to the battlefield. The essence they are missing is that they lost the war because they did not stand upright before God, and they came to the absurd conclusion that only the Ark would win the war. And in that work, Hophni and Phinehas, the two sons of Eli, the high priest, were actively involved. Without the high priest's permission, they dared to enter the most holy place and bring the Ark of the Covenant of God. When the Ark of the Covenant, a symbol of God's presence, entered the camp of Israel, the people cried out with a loud voice, and the earth shook. But what was the result, everyone? Israel was defeated even more. 30,000 infantrymen died, and even Hophni and Phinehas, the priests, were all killed. And the Ark of the Covenant of God was taken by the Philistines.